Hello, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hello. Nice to see you.
Or would you prefer Sir Mark Olly
Oof.
of the Round Table?
No, no, I'm not. I'm not of a knightly disposition. Well, I am of a knightly disposition actually, but I'm more rocking the Merlin look for this one than than I
Now I
am
have
the
to say
knight.
that because
Yeah.
of your latest book, King Arthur. I mean, was it King Arthur and the Night? Sorry,
It's
what's the title of it again?
Polychronicon,
That's
which
right.
is
That's the word I
That's the
couldn't
big
think of.
word. Yeah, it always fools people. You want to see the Americans try to say that. Honestly, they all defer to me. It's Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph, and Arthur.
Right.
So it's Merlin, the magician. It's Joseph of Arimathea, which is the Grail, and of course it's Arthur, who was never a king. But you're going to ask me about that, aren't you? I'm
I am going
sure.
to ask you about that. But that
Yeah,
word
yeah.
polychronicle, I've never heard of
Polychronicon.
it before, so I don't know where
Um,
you dug that one up.
well, there's two reasons for it, both very good reasons. First one is nobody else has used it on a King Arthur book. And you've got to bear in mind there's about 300 books on the subject of Arthur
Mm.
worldwide that come out every year. So to hit on something that nobody else has used is nigh on impossible. And the last Polychronicon, which is a chronological history, was written by a monk in Chester in the 1300s, about 1320. And he included a massive section on King Arthur in chronological order. So, way, way back 800 years ago, there was this guy in Chester doing it. So, here am I. I thought, I'll have a go. So, Polychronicon, chronological history, it's written like a diary.
Mm. Yes, I've
But
never heard the word before.
yeah.
English was my top subjects at school.
There's always something
Not
I.
very high, but it was my top subject. But I've never heard
Well,
the word before. So we're
yeah.
learning all the time, aren't we?
Well,
So
it's a big word when it's not in the spell checker on your computer,
that's right. Yeah, there you go. So at least
Well, yeah,
I can use that as the excuse as well. But it's not in the
yeah.
spell checker. But
Well, it's like I
it's
say, chronological history, polychronicon. That's all it is.
polychronicle. Yeah.
Chronological history.
Anyway, once
Yeah,
again, it's great to welcome you to the show.
yeah.
And
Thank you.
I've been looking forward to this one because one of my earliest memories of when we first got a TV was actually Sir Lancelot. I don't know if you remember that old TV series,
Oh, now we're going way
the
back.
old
Yeah,
black
I
and white
do.
TV
Yeah,
series, and
yeah, yeah.
it set up like a magic with King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Um, Now they kind of set that kind of in the Middle Ages, around about 1500s, but I think King Arthur goes back way further back than that, doesn't it?
Yes, you've got two, if you like, main areas where people focus on Arthur, and most people go for the easy one, and that's the medieval one. So you've got, Geoffrey of Monmouth, stay in the 1100s, rattles out this amazing history of Arthur and the, King of the Britons and all that, and then you've got the sort of, the Excalibur Martin Bormann movie type. Thing that then reels out from that, where it's all knights in shining armor and rescuing maidens from dragons and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of version number one, and that's what most people default to. But there is a second version, which is, way, way back, end of the Roman era, either side of 500 AD. And that's more or less what that movie about King Arthur that was supposed to be the true movie. I think it was one of the last big Arthur movies to come out. The one with
Mm,
Clive Owen and
mm,
Keira Knightley and all that. That movie that's set at the end of the Roman era, at the
right.
start of the Saxon invasions. That's where the real Arthur is. He's sat there, and that's the Arthur that I try and focus on, concentrate on in the book. There are clues to him in the medieval material because you couldn't tell a story about somebody and just lie about it in medieval times, or they'd think it was fake. They wouldn't
Mm.
take you seriously, especially not if you're writing for royalty. So there are clues in there, but you've really got to get a grips with that original material and approach it as an archaeologist would to sort out the wood from the trees, because there's so much nonsense in
Yeah,
the
well,
stuff.
it's all like artistic license, a lot of it,
Oh,
isn't
to
it?
all
Yeah,
kinds, all kinds. But
just to
there are
make it.
links. I mean, there are links which will undoubtedly cover.
Yeah, there was a later King Arthur film. It was made sort of about 3 or 4 years ago, wasn't there? I
Oh,
think that.
that's that. Yeah, that's the one that looks like Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
That's
thought it was actually
that's
quite good for what I saw
uh,
of it, actually. But
very
as a
very
film, yeah,
yeah, very sort of modern.
yeah.
Very yeah, very modern in its approach. Yeah,
But the
yeah.
Clive Owen one I did enjoy actually. I think they started sort of trying to make them a bit more gruesome as well than it used to in the old days.
Yeah,
and
that's a bit more kick-ass, as
which
they
is
say. Yeah,
more realistic, I
yeah.
suppose. Yeah, because I don't think I'd have liked to lived in those days, to be honest.
No,
Probably
it
wouldn't have
would
lived
have
very long.
been really tough. I mean, anything resembling civilization, the Romans kind of took that away.
Hmm.
And the Saxons were, they were not for really doing things the way the Romans did. They had a different approach. So basically, Britain went back to being tribal. It was ruled
Hmm.
by people
Hmm.
that controlled zones. And essentially, that's what Arthur was. He controlled the northern zone as a battle leader. He's given in the original, he's given as Dux Bellorum, which just is Duke of Battles. That's what he translates as.
Hmm.
So he's a warrior. He's not a king at all. I mean, the king might have been Melvyn Gwynedd of Wales because he was the king at that time. And kings, again, Wales was split into three. So you had three different kings. So the king of North Wales was the one that was looking after Arthur as his battle chieftain. So that was the setup then.
Hmm.
Um, but it's Celtic tribal, it's not medieval.
Now, I guess
Uh,
because this is a paranormal show,
yeah,
I guess we ought to go to the paranormal part of things, which concern Merlin, the magician. Now, was
yeah.
he, as far as you know, did he exist? Did he have these magical powers, and was he a real wizard?
It depends. Yeah, definition of a real wizard. Wow. Yes, he did really exist, but you've got to approach it knowing that Merlin is a title. So during the period we're looking at, from about 400 AD to 600 AD, in that period in Wales, there was about six of them, different ones. Some of them are extremely well known, some of them less well known. So the most well known are usually the early ones. So you've got um, people like Merlin Taliesin. He's the first one. Taliesin with the title Merlin. So he's a poet, obviously poet and a bard, incredibly famous. The next one's Merlin Ambrosius. Ambrosius is a sort of religious, educated battle leader, and he's the brother of Uther Pendragon. So you're well into Arthur there.
Hmm.
But Arthur's, I suppose you call him uncle, is also one of the Merlins. The next one's Merlin Le Logan, which translates as little friend or dear friend. Now, he is the Merlin that everybody associates with Arthur because he's the guy who lives over 100. He's probably about 102, 103 when he dies. And he is a full blown, amazing, sort of druidic, scientist, astrologer, astronomer. He's all of that. But the thing is, he dies halfway through. He sees Arthur's victory at the Battle of Baden. And the next Merlin to take over, which is Merlin Willet, that's Merlin the Mad, he doesn't live as long. He only lives to being about 80. But he's through, if you like, he's through the period that sees the defeat of Arthur, and then he sees civil war breaking out amongst the Britons. So he basically goes mad, retreats off to his astronomical. He's got like a circle, like what do they call it? Oh, like one of these places where you look at the stars. I can't think of the exact word.
Oh, the planetarium type of thing, is
Yeah,
that?
a bit like that. He's got this set up in the woods that he can go to. Anyway, after him, there's a guy called Merlin Tortugan who is then a poet, and he's up there in Cumbria, basically in the same area as Merlin Willet. And then Merlin Tortugan, I think, spawns another Merlin who is a bit more obscure, and he's over in Northern Ireland. And then the title gets obliterated by the Anglo-Saxons. So that title, that office, if you like, ends at the end, well, around about 600 AD. It ends around about then. So I've got at least six of them, and
Oh,
they would most definitely have come over as being magical. I mean, the Merlin that was there at the beginning of Arthur's reign, Merlin Le Logan, you can imagine him stood on top of a mountain going, right, that's it, I'm switching the sun off,
yeah,
bang,
yeah.
and the whole place goes black.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, it's an eclipse and he knows it's coming, but it's still pretty amazing. And the Druids were, I mean, they'd been around at this point, they'd been around over 3,000 years. So he really is literally standing on the shoulders of giants. All the archaeotechnology and all the stuff that we find in the past and all the U parts and all the stuff that gets featured on programs like Ancient Aliens and all that, a lot of that was known to the Druids. They were aware of that. They were Greek philosophers, they were Pythagoreans, they knew that side of it, which the book covers. I mean, that's why I start with Merlin, because he
Mm.
is the oldest path, if you like, the oldest tradition. And he would certainly have looked magical. He would have known about curing with herbs and healing. And I do very strongly suspect that there would have been that spiritual side of it, very much in a kind of an ancestor's way, reaching beyond what you see. into the unknown. I think there's a huge, hefty wedge of that. Because you would have got to study Celtic beliefs to know that they had this very strong idea that you came from somewhere, and when you died, you went off to somewhere. So they had this strong idea of there being another life, an afterlife, another dimension that you went to when you died. Only where we point at heaven up in the sky, they had this idea that you disappeared down. So if you went into water, if you were like these bog bodies defined in that, if you dump something into water as a sacrifice or an offering, you're sending it on to the next world. You're going on into that next realm, which is down in the earth as far as the Celts are concerned. So there is that huge spiritual, mystical side to Merlin, absolutely.
I wonder if they would have had some evidence of that back then, do you think?
Yeah, I would have said so. The Celts in particular were almost honest to the point of being brutal. The Romans found them very difficult to deal with because they were very direct and very upfront and very matter of fact. So I think what we see now, the ghosts, the spirits, the weird things that happen, interdimensional beings, if you're into that, the fairies that live in burial mounds, fairy mounds, all that side of things, they would have had exactly that same kind of tradition. I'm positive they would, because their mythology, certainly has a strong element of that. Things like the Mabinogion, I mean, that's a Victorian translation of Celtic material that was, embodied in various Welsh writings, and there's a lot of Arthurian material in that puts Arthur into this other world, almost in a sort of godlike sense. But that's what happens when you deify heroes, I suppose. They become godlike. And yeah.
As I say, something that's often crossed my mind. We heard about the burning of witches and everything. How comes Merlin wasn't burnt at the stake at some point?
Two different time periods, and actually, it's a really good question. You probably don't even know why it's a good question, but it's a really good question.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's a thing that's crossed my mind a few times.
Well, the answers at the same time that Druidry is decreasing, the new religion of Christianity is increasing. So these two are sort of, on a collision course with each other, which is why the second chapter of the book deals with Joseph of Arimathea and the Holy Grail, because there's no point talking about Arthur searching for relics and stuff like that. And there's no point talking about Arthur's mindset unless you realize that for the 400 years before he's here, that's when Christianity's building. And that's when that tradition comes into play. And at some point it merges, the two almost come together, probably first century, probably in the British Isles, might even have been on Anglesey. They reach some kind of agreement and the two come together and it becomes the Celtic Church. But the Celtic in very strong language church doesn't operate the same as any other church anywhere else in the world. Because you've got the Celtic church, you've got the Roman church, which is, much later because that's founded by Peter and Paul 62, 63 AD. Whereas the Celtic one is Joseph of Arimathea, and that's kind of 52, 54 AD. You've also got the original church because, Jesus left all the Judaic, Hebrew and Egyptian material, and he left that behind in the Middle East. So you've got that growing. So you've got sort of one in Jerusalem, if you like, one in Rome, and lo and behold, there's another one over here. And I'm going to stick my neck out and say it's probably Chester. You had these three capitals of Christianity. But if you go and knock on the Pope's door and say, "What's the oldest church on planet Earth?" he'll go, "Oh, that'll be Joseph's Church in the UK." So
I did know that.
Yeah, it is. It's the oldest one, founded by Joseph. So
we're not going to spring. Oh, you mentioned Jesus there. I mean, we're not going to go too much in that direction. But do you actually believe there was someone named Jesus back then, or was that? I mean, I've heard the theory that he was actually just an invention, basically.
Well, it's. I mean, I'm going to go possibly down that route with the book in the not too distant future because a huge number of folks have asked me similar questions. That might be where I'm going next.
Right.
What appears to be the problem is, it's like over here, there's loads of people called John. Well, back then in Jerusalem, there was loads of people called Yeshua, which is Joshua. So it's a ridiculous percentage. It's something like 22% of the population of male population of Jerusalem had Yeshua as a first name, because at that point it's your second name that's most important. So you'd have Yeshua bar Joseph, which is, Yeshua, son of Joseph. Oh, we know which one that is, because those two names are not linked with anybody else. But then when you got people saying, oh, well, Jesus evangelized, India after he was crucified, well, I don't have a problem with that. People started to make themselves look like you would expect Jesus to look as a part of early Christianity. That was the image. And there was just hundreds of people called Jesus. They were everywhere. So I don't, that's not a problem. Confusing. Yeah, definitely confusing. So I think there was one individual that was, that did what they say he did. And there's more than enough evidence to support, I think, the existence of that individual. But then all the other stuff, especially the stuff that's been bolted on in the last, 100 years or so, or even stuff that's been taken out in the last 100 years, I'm not convinced that we're actually ploughing the right furrow, I think is what I'd use. You're off into Dan Brown Da Vinci Code territory there.
That's right.
There's all kinds of weird stuff. So what I intend to do is do the same thing perhaps with the Bible as I did with Robin Hood and as I've done with King Arthur, and that's trying to get back to the source materials and have a look at what the source materials say.
Exactly.
From the time,
Well, I understand there was quite a few Davids around at the time as well.
Hell yes! I mean, some of the Old Testament biblical names just got used to death, but you would have been, David Bar, whoever, So
David and Goliath, all the rest of them, and
yeah.
So. Oh, okay. So, where does Guinevere come into this? Do you think that she was actually a big part of this story, or was she another invention?
When you get to the medieval stuff, which a lot of the feminists get really upset by because it's terrible, it's really bad the way they treat her in the medieval stuff. That's not how she really was. When you get to the Roman stuff, when you go back to the original stuff, Arthur is basically a womanizing battle leader. So he ends up with 7 sons and at least 3 daughters and 3 wives that we know of. Okay. And they're all, for some reason, referred to as Guinevere. They have Guinevere as the first name and then something after it. But the first wife he has is Gwaia. She produces Mordred. The second one he has is some bird from Ruthin that he steals off another warrior called Whale, who then it turns into a battle and he ends up killing Whale for this other lass. And then his last wife in inverted commas, is Guinevere, and she is actually Pictish. She's brought down to him. I thought her family was from Edinburgh. The Picts had migrated. They'd settled North Wales and the Mersey Valley, Derbyshire, parts of Lancashire and Cumbria. They'd settled all over the place. So North Wales in particular, Arthur needed the support of the Picts. So actually, she's absolutely crucial. When he marries Guinevere, the Picts rule through their queens. So when he does that, when he settles down, when he's older and he goes, right, this is the bird for me kind of thing, and he settles down, she is so important because she brings warriors and kudos because, she's a queen. So actually in the original story, she is more important than Arthur. But she goes wrong at the end. It all goes badly wrong because she does have an affair, but Lancelot's not in the original story. What happens is Arthur goes over to fight on the continent because he's fighting for the Roman Emperor. I think it's what's his name? Begins with Theodosius. He's off fighting for Theodosius in on the continent in France. When that happens, word comes back that he's been killed. So she does what any queen would do. She marries next of kin. She ends up with Mordred. But when Arthur does turn up, when he finally comes back after whatever it is, 18 months, 2 years or whatever, all of a sudden she's like, right, okay.
Yeah, she's got all his money and everything.
I've backed the losing side here. I've just gone off and bonked his son. This is not going to look good when he gets back. So she does a runner, but she runs back to Edinburgh and they actually execute her for dishonour. Because the Picts were notorious for keeping weird animals as pets, and it's thought that on the slopes of the hill fort, when she got home, they basically released the big cats. So she got torn to bits by whatever they had, jaguars, tigers, whatever. They
Nasty.
just, pulled her to bits. So it's not a good end. She gets executed in the end. But she's also a bit of an opportunist. I think you get the impression she's a bit kind of, I am a queen sort of thing, very full of herself. I'm full of power and this, that, and the other. And very often those kind of people make the wrong decision when everything goes south.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened to her in the end. So yeah, she is incredibly important. She triggers off the Battle of Baden. Somebody insults her. I think somebody actually gives her a slap, and it's called one of the three negative blows of Britain or something. It's in the triads, and because she's been slapped, it triggers off this conflict about honour and dishonour, and it ends up being the final battle at Cam Lan. They have this whopping great big bust up, and it's her that started it.
Wow. So, as they usually do, don't they, women?
Well, terrible, yeah, terrible. Well, like I say, she's much more important than the medieval version. She's not just some bird to be traded back and to between knights in shining armour. She's not like that at all.
Yeah. You said they set up home. Now, that brings us to like Camelot. Now, did Camelot exist, and where was it?
Well, if I speak as an archaeologist, and I'm speaking to all the archaeologists, wherever they may be, out there in the big wide world, they'll all agree with me that at that point in the decline of Roman Britain, there's only one city that qualifies as the number one city in Britain, and that's Chester. It's 11 acres bigger than anywhere else. It's got the biggest amphitheatre in the British Isles. It's got this enormous Principia, this big commandery building with a supply base. It's got the biggest Roman baths, which gets converted into a palace. So chances are that's where Arthur's palace was. There's about 2 foot of debris in it that were built up during the Dark Age period when Arthur was here. And then it's got the elliptical building, which is this weird circular building right in the middle of it. It looks just like the Pantheon in Rome, which in Anglo-Saxon stroke late period Latin is known as the tabulus rotundus, or the round floor, because table back then meant floor. It meant a flat area. So when you get this idea that Merlin gives it as a gift, as a wedding gift to Arthur, it's possible that he, rededicated the building at Arthur's wedding to Guinevere. And then it says, but the table sat 360 knights. And you think, that's one hell of a table. But if you translate table as a space, as a floor, you'd get 300 odd knights in a building. That's not difficult. Not something the size of the Pantheon anyway. Dead easy. So this is what I mean when I say some of the later things that find their way into later legend. When you engineer them backwards, they just make sense. It becomes clear that they are still based on fact, but they've been corrupted. They've been taken somewhere else by the storytellers who weren't familiar with the original. No, Camelot is Chester. Even the Welsh actually tell you that as late as when Le Morte d'Arthur was written. Thomas Mallory wrote that in the sort of late 1400s. The introduction that was put into that tells you that you can go and see the ruins of Camelot in Chester. That's where they are. Go and see them.
Right? Yeah, because I've heard that in Cornwall there's supposed to be. A possible site, but you don't agree with that at all.
No, if you're a huge fan, if you're a massive fan of Glastonbury and Tintagel, and you love London, and you think Camelot's Viraconium or Roxeter or whatever, don't bother with the book because it's just going to annihilate that. It completely annihilates that. But I'm not the only person to do that. There are other writers that have pointed out that there are huge inconsistencies in that. That train of thought. Well, you're talking that it's a reworked Norman legend. It's
Well, anyone that's interested in the actual truth, then they should be willing to have their mind changed. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are tiles from the excavation of that elliptical building. There wasn't a lot of it left, to be honest. It was swept away in the 1970s by the building of the bus station, but they kept a lot of bits of it, and there are actual tiles from the floor of that building in storage in the archaeological facilities in Chester. So if I got one of them and I kind of got them out of storage and put them on the floor, I'm looking at the surface that Arthur walked on. So you can get that close. You know what I mean? There's one or two other places where you can get that close as well. And I would say that with absolute confidence. There's no doubt about it.
Mm.
And what the book does, because it's polychronicon, because it's in chronological order, is if you just read the book and you slowly go through the book, it builds. So you start thinking, oh, hang on a minute, they did that back then, and that was in Roman times, and then a bit later on they stuck this building up, and then a bit later on this comes into play, and then you've got the Christian martyrs in the arena, and then you've got, and by the time you finish, by the time you get to Arthur, you start to think the way that he thinks, and you begin to see Chester, Camelot, the way he saw it. And all of a sudden, by the time you get to the end of that section, you're like, there can't possibly be anywhere else. There is nowhere else. That period in time, Winchester was Anglo-Saxon, so that didn't exist. Viraconium was just a big town, Wroxeter, which had gone derelict by then, so that's useless. London's Viking, so that's even later. There was a socking great big Roman fort there, but, Chester's 11 acres bigger than any Roman fort ever built worldwide. It's massive, it's enormous. Vespasian and his son, Titus, I think his son is, but Vespasian came back from Jerusalem to Britain and then designed Chester and built Chester. So you can see where his mind was at. He was building a world-class capital city. And all these are little bits of things nobody ever says. What I'm telling you now is unique to the book. And as I say, people will read it, and then gradually it builds this picture. I expect people to kind of shut the book after chapter 4 and go, "Whoa, what have I just read?"
I've done that a few times, I know.
I have to go back and start again. Because chapter 5 is that's the academic bit. I thought people are going to read this book and they're going to go, "Oh, this is a load of nonsense. I don't know where he's got any of this from." But the entire of the last chapter 5 is all the literature, and it's all again in chronological order, and it just runs through. You can see how the legend developed. So there is something there for the academics. It's not a non-academic work. It's got all the clout, as it were, right at the end.
Yeah, sounds amazing. I've made a note. Must visit Chester because I've never been there. So
it's amazing. It's got one of the biggest circuits of surviving Roman walls in the world. I think there's only 2 or 3 other sites that have got better walls, and you can still walk all the way around them now. There's half the amphitheatre out there. You can see it excavated, and then you get into the mysteries. Go and have a look in St. John's Church. Go and have a look in, in the main Abbey Church in the middle. And
I must book a couple of days in Chester. That's
you'll love it.
One of the things for this summer.
Yeah.
Right now, I guess we kind of come into now. Another thought that came into my mind as you mentioned about the Knights of the Round Table. Why is it that only maybe a couple of knights actually made fame from the knights, like Sir Lancelot and Sir Gawain, I think it was, and there the Green Knight, and they're kind of the only, or Galahad, they're kind of the only ones you ever got to hear of.
Well, there's a formula. There's actually a formula involved. I've got to say, I've got to thank John Matthews for this, because he's a famous Arthurian scholar. He's written hundreds of books. But he took the trouble to go back and actually see how many warriors he could find. So he went back into the Welsh. I think he got something like 260 odd names, actual names from different records, ancient records of who these warriors were. But, and this is the big but, there were traditionally 12 really strong warriors gathered together in Welsh tradition into groups of 3. So you got 4 groups of 3. Lancelot isn't one of them. He's not listed because that name Lancelot is it's a medieval invention. It links to Roger of Ponthieu, who was in charge of Lancashire. So it's post-Norman. It's a medieval writing, if you like, which is why Lancelot, by the way, is up in Lancashire. So like Martin Mere is where the mermaid fostered him, and he fights a giant at Medlock Ford, which is Giant Tarquin at Medlock Ford, which is in Manchester. So a lot of Lancelot stuff's Lancashire. But going back to the original list is Welsh. So all the names are Welsh. So like, Gawain is Gwalchmai, I think is which means the Hawk of May or the Hawk of Battle. But so all the names are Welsh. But the reason they've done that in 3s is a bit like the Heffentafel board, which is where you've got a king in the centre and he's defended by immediate knights. And then you have other knights on the outside of the board that attack him. So that board, that concept, Nine Men's Morris, or whatever you want to call it, which was a shepherd's game in Wales, that is actually designed to teach people strategy. Well, Arthur needed prominent knights. He needed certain knights in order to be strategic. So they're like lesser battle leaders, if you like, lesser chieftains. Percival, Bors, Gawain, trying to think of some of the others. There's one called Eliwad, who's a dwarf. You won't have heard of him. Merlin is listed actually as a warrior because he's a fighter. Oh gosh, there's more. Peridor, trying to think who they all are. Anyway, they're all in the book. They're all listed. I've got all the names.
Wow.
And a brief description of who they are and what they're skilled at, what they do. There's a brilliant story in the Welsh called Par Gur. Par Gur, it translates basically as "Who are you?" It's called "What Knight?" But it's "Who are you?" Because what happens is Arthur comes riding up to one of his forts on the Clyde Peninsula in Wales. He rides up to this hill fort, and they have holding areas in front of the gate. It's also called What Man or the Gatekeeper, because the gatekeeper's on top of the gate and he doesn't know who these people are. So he shouts down basically and he goes, "Who are you?" Now, at that point, Arthur then has to tell him who they are. So then you get this list. He sets off with this list. Well, I'm Arthur of the so and so, and I've done
Right, yeah.
this, that, and the other. And then somebody else shouts in and goes, I'm Gawain of the such and such a thing, and you get all of his. And Kai, I'm Sir Kai the Fair, and I'm. So by the time you finished, unfortunately, we've only got the first bit because the manuscript is lost from a certain point. But you get most of the dozen knights are listed, and they tell you, well, I was in this story and I did this story and I did this great deed and I went searching for this. And by the time you finished, it all ties it together. But it's a really, really important piece because it's set in the right period, at the right location, at the right time. They had hill forts, they did this. It's absolutely bang on, very early Welsh one. And that's where a lot of the names come from.
Fascinating. Oh,
It's
never realised a lot of that.
Well, everybody turns around and they all go, do you know what? There's absolutely nothing to do with the old Arthur that survived. I read a book the other day and there was only 3 references in it. And I'm thinking, well, that's not true. Because yes, we've only got the manuscripts, maybe from the 7th, 8th, 9th century that have then been survived in copies, but we know from the language, the archaeolinguistics, we've gone and checked and we can tell that these are from older sources. So as long as it's before Geoffrey of Monmouth, you're on fairly safe ground. It's coming from somewhere else. And even Geoffrey, it's great. He's doing the history of the kings of Britain and all that. And he says, well, I went down to the library at Bangor and I got my old mate down at Bangor to loan me some books. And that's how I know what this bit of the history is. So he's telling you that he's got his source material from North Wales.
Yeah.
He's telling you that's where it comes from. So what you do is you follow the thread, don't you? You know what I mean? You follow it back.
So really what they've done in history is that you've got King Arthur and they've made kind of Sir Lancelot as kind of like the second biggest name in the story, if you like, when it's kind of all lies, really, what you're saying.
It's Lancelot is the knight in shining armour, and they replaced the barbarian in shining armour who was actually Sir Gawain. Yeah. So everything Lancelot ends up being in the later tradition, essentially that's what Sir Gawain was in the earlier tradition.
So it's kind of like a figurehead, really.
Yeah, they wanted a nice French, shining Renaissance polished armor type, chivalrous.
Which is what the TV series, the old 50s TV series. But when we very first got a TV, it was one of the first shows I can remember.
Well, the best example is Excalibur, isn't it? That movie. Yes. I mean, everything's shiny and bright, and but I like Merlin in that. Merlin, I think, is very convincing as a grumpy old guy that doesn't want to be mithered. He's great. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
So it has merits.
Also, to come on to Excalibur about the sword in the stone and everything.
Yeah.
Is there truth in that story about the sword in the stone that only Arthur could pull it out?
Yes, but you've got to almost flip it on its head. If you know that at Arthur's crowning, when he was 15, because he was crowned in Chester, the Welsh tell you, he was awarded a bronze sword of office, and another 3 rulers, warriors, who'd also had bronze swords of office, turned up for his coronation, if you like, for his appointment as Duke of Battles. When you know that, the process for casting bronze swords was that you had two halves of a stone mould, and you poured the bronze in to the top of the mould till it spat. And then what you had to do was you had to split it in half and pull the sword from the stone. You had to, because the only way you were going to get it out. And it was usually done under the prying eyes of the druids. So you've got Merlin there. So the original one's called Calderbolg or Caliburn, which means shining or flashing one. So you can imagine them opening the mould up and getting Arthur to come in and pull out his ceremonial sword, and Merlin going, right, it's already shiny, it's flashing, that's what we'll call it, Calderbolg. So that makes perfect sense. Archaeologically, they've even done that on Time Team. They've had a go at bronze casting on television on Time Team, and they know how it was done. So yes, he did pull a sword from a stone, but it wasn't like a big iron medieval anvil set on a rock in a churchyard with this cross-shaped sword sticking out. I mean, that's been modernized to medieval tastes. Also, he did have iron swords. He had two, which were Roman gladius type swords. He definitely had them, because if you went into battle with a bronze sword, somebody hit it with an iron one, they'd just chop it in half because it's too soft. It's like lead. So he had his ceremonial sword, and then Excalibur, the thing that the medieval people focus on as Excalibur, that was an iron sword, very much like the Viking swords, proper folded piece of metal, which I think has ended up in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, courtesy of Richard the Lionheart. I think he gifted it to the church in medieval times during the Crusades. So even that's still kicking around out there. I always say this, one of these days I'm going to phone up the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and go, have you guys got a rusty old iron bar in a cupboard somewhere and you've got no idea what it is? If there's anybody out there who wants to make a documentary or a television series, I'd be delighted to do that on camera.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. You might get a phone call. You never know.
It'd be great, yeah. Especially if it's Spielberg. Sorry, I'm only joking. Only joking.
I'm sure you're not. But where does so we've got Excalibur, but where the Lady of the Lake, when the sword was thrown in the lake and this hand comes up with the sword, where did that story come from?
That's interesting. I think that goes back to what we were discussing at the beginning, the idea that the Celts had, that if you've got this mirror flat stretch of water that's mirroring the existence of us, it's like as above so below sort of thing, because whatever's going up obviously goes down as well. They had this idea that there were beings, spiritual beings, living below that level, onto the next level. And I think it's a survival of this idea of throwing offerings into water. The reason I think that is everybody goes, yeah, okay, we know about the Bronze Age, we know about flag fen and all the offerings that were thrown in during the Bronze Age, and swords, daggers, knives, shavers, axe heads, loads of axe heads, anything that was circular got thrown in because it represented the sun. Yes, we know all about that in the Bronze Age. What most people don't realize, right up to medieval times, you're talking in the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s, even in the 1300s, they were still throwing swords into lakes. It's the same tradition. It's the same idea. So the idea that there's a female force in there is very Celtic. The idea there's a goddess, a water goddess. The Romans had them, water nymphs and water sprites and things like that. The idea of that persisting into medieval legend to create the Lady of the Lake, that's perfectly acceptable. I mean, to be honest, the whole of what we just discussed, that section, majority of that doesn't appear in the book. Because the book's very factual. I don't really discuss the Lady of the Lake as a character because she's mythology. That's where the mythology crosses over, the belief systems come in. It's not really a mythological book. I mean, there is mythological stuff in there, but a lot of it's very down to earth, matter of fact.
Yeah, you tried to stay as factual as you possibly could.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of some lady coming up with a sword out of a lake, and that's the basis of, authority and rulership. I quite like the idea of that. I think we kind of need that now.
I think because we're talking about King Arthur, we've got to cover those types of subjects, because I think that's kind of where where real history and mythology sort of cross over, don't they?
Well, it does overlap.
Like that.
This is where the academic side of it comes in, and I think John Matthews was quite happy with the way I dealt with it, and a couple of other academics, because you do, at some point, you have to differentiate between the two. You know,
Mm,
you've got to say, okay, when Arthur's fighting a dragon, is he fighting a dragon, or is he fighting a Viking ship with a dragon head on the front?
mm,
You
mm,
know, when he goes off hunting boars, wild boars, is he hunting a huge giant wild boar that leaves footprints in rocks, or is he going off hunting Anglo-Saxons whose emblem is a boar? You can see where this is going, can't you?
mm, mm.
And that kind of slightly more sensible approach, a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people just go, you know, yeah, that's over there, that's spiritual, you know, that can't be real, you know, and then this bit over here, yeah, that's physical because that physically exists. It's not a clear, it's not clear cut. You know, there's not a line down the middle that puts you into one camp or the other, because the Celts in particular, boy, did they spiritualize stuff, you know, they really did. He has a battle with a cat at one point. The cats are on Anglesey, and he has this giant fight with this enormous cat. Leaves claws in his shields and shreds Arthur to bits. And I think it's only Kai and Gawain that save him from being killed and all this. But the cats, the Qatari, were a Celtic tribe named after the cat. So all you do is go look where the Qatari were. Guess what? They're on Anglesey. So
Right.
as soon as you start looking at the
Yeah.
emblems,
Mm,
you can see how they've sort of physicalized something that was physical, but only in a spiritual sense. You've got to sort out, you know, the wood from the trees. Yeah, of course there were cats on Anglesey, but they weren't big cats. They weren't, you know.
yeah.
It was a tribe. He had a massive scrap with the tribe, and they almost killed him.
Yeah.
You
So they
know,
kind of exaggerate the story to, I suppose, to make it into a legend as such.
and at the same time, if you're sat in the Great Hall, you know, and it's 600 AD, and somebody's giving you the heroic tales of Arthur, you know, hey, he fought this cat and he
Mm,
fought this bear and he fought this wolf and he fought this, you know, you're going to be sat there going, well, I know who that tribe is, and I know who that tribe is, and I know what race the wolves are. You know, they're Vikings, and you know the boars are the Saxons, and you'd automatically know that. But here we are 800 years later, and we've lost it. You know, it's all the years it's took to do the book. It took 45 years in total to get the book into print. You know, I've buried myself in the mythology of that period, and you know the way they looked at these things. So
mm,
you've got to you know, they call it contextualization. It's when you put things into context. You have to look at things the way they looked at them, not the way we look at them. Um, you know, there's so much rubbish written about Arthur where people have not done that. You know, they're taking stuff from all over the place, all
yeah.
different
Yeah.
periods, and you know, they've got no idea of you know. I mean, my specialty was the Celts. Years and years, that's been my specialty. So when you know that that's what period you're dealing with, you've got to go back and do it the way they would have done it. I can't wait
Mm.
to get hold of Bible material. That's just going to
Oh,
be,
that's going to be fascinating. Yeah. We could get into all
yeah.
sorts of UFO sightings and all sorts of things in there
Oh,
as well.
don't get me on Ezekiel, but go on, off you go.
Yeah. I'm going to say, I thought we ought to put your name down for Mastermind on King Arthur. Well,
Mm.
should we? Have you tried it?
Well, you know what's going to happen, don't you? They're all going to go, well, you know, let's ask you all about Geoffrey of Monmouth, and I'm going to be like, I don't do that. I don't do
Oh,
the medieval. I don't do the medieval stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to say, when I was looking through the list of things that you've
Mm.
tackled over your life, or should I say, it actually blows me away. And I think a good demonstration of what you've been talking about with King Arthur shows the height of your knowledge with no notes in front of you, basically.
Yeah, I'm
And
just, yeah, I'm,
you know,
I'm
it's all
flying
up in
live
your
without
head.
a net.
Is that the same with all your subjects? Basically, you can talk endlessly
Yeah,
about them.
people have commented on that. I mean, I do about 30. I think I'm up to 37 PowerPoints,
That's what I
and
was. Wow,
what
I
they
know.
are, they're like live television shows. So if people book me for a talk, basically, you've got an hour, and you've got maybe 600 or 700 different images that will pop up on the screen behind me,
Hmm.
and I don't use notes. I just don't. I'll learn it. You know,
And
it's
you've got to
ridiculous.
have. I would say you've got to have some kind of photographic memory knowledge because I don't think I could do it, not without notes in front of me. Anyway,
Well, anybody
I
out there
can't even do
who's
this show without notes
well,
in front of me.
I'm not saying this in a bad way. I'm saying this in a good way. But anybody out there who's even slightly autistic or on the spectrum will know that an image is sufficient to trigger off what you need, because
Hmm.
people think differently. They think in terms of pictures. They think in terms of images. Um, I sit somewhere between the two, so once I get cracking, all my cues are up there on the screen somewhere, and I've got a rough
Right.
idea where it's going. So it's not entirely without, some kind of prompting,
Yeah, you get some
unless we're
kind
doing
of
an interview like
like
this.
a bullet note in your head sort of thing.
Yeah, there's something up there. You look at it and you go, "What did I used to talk about when I put this slide up?" Oh, yeah, I remember it now.
Oh,
So
right.
that helps with the talks. But I mean, interviews like this, I'm doing this totally from memory. There's 488 pages of notes, so there's no point me thumbing through. That's
No,
how long the
I
book
thought,
is.
you
It's
take forever trying to find them. I know what you're
yeah, yeah,
saying. It's yeah, it amazes me though. But I mean, also, I mean, I just recently, well, not recently, I obtained a Robin Hood video from you, which was from a few years ago, and I
yeah,
was actually
yeah,
fascinated by the amounts of different connections with different cities. And we always
yeah.
think of Robin Hood as connected to Nottingham and Sherwood and everything, but he actually goes, there's connections all over the
Well,
country.
yeah, in the real world, he only spent about 3 or 4 days in Nottingham. I mean, he was in the woods around Nottingham, but it's only the time when Richard the Lionheart's actually in this country, the rare occasion, one of the rare two occasions he was here. It's only when he's here and he's at Nottingham that Robin's there at Nottingham. Nottingham's just been very good at claiming it as their own, very much as Glastonbury has claimed Arthur as its own over a long period of time. But then it's kind of a footnote, if you like, because the prominence and the importance of Chester has deliberately been covered up. They've destroyed all of that. The last vestige of that was the Palatine counties of Lancashire and Cheshire, which they did away with in 1972. The self-governing counties. That was the end of it. But that was the
Mm.
end of 2,000 years of rule by Chester. So lo and behold, you go and have a look at Robin Hood. He's brought up, if you like, he's adopted and brought up by one of the Earls of Chester. So his traditional foundation, if you like, is the same traditional foundation as you'll find in this book about Arthur. They're
Mm.
just building on Chester.
Mm.
I think Chester's just, it's the lost gem. It's the absolute gem of Britain. It's like it's the centre of the spokes of the wheel. The rest of everything else revolves around Chester. For 2,000 years, Chester's really been the key, the key place. I'll give you an example, just to get back to the book again. I was just curious. I did something as an experiment just so we're coming towards the end of the book. And I had a look at what happened when the Roman Empire broke up, because obviously eventually it ended up breaking up into the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. So you still had Rome in the middle, but then the capital of the Eastern Empire, which became the Byzantines, was Constantinople, which is Istanbul. So I thought, okay, you've got a capital over there. Where's the capital of the Western Empire? So I thought, I wonder what happens if I have a look at Chester. So I had a look at Chester, I had a look at Constantinople, and you got Rome in the middle. So I thought, let's do the obvious thing. Let's go all the way back to the days of questing and all that, and look at the geography. How many Roman miles are those two cities away from Rome? Give or take, not very much.
Wow,
They're the same distance away.
that's
So
crazy.
it is. And when you look at that, when you think, okay, somebody's actually set off from Rome somewhere, maybe it was Vespasian in the first century. They've set off and they've gone off and had a look and decided where the furthest points of the empire are, and then stuck a whopping great big city there on purpose. And that's how it looks to me. Now, everybody knows about Constantinople because of Constantine the Great. He founded that
Mm.
as like the big, the big thing over there. But then when you come across to here, you don't realize that Constantine the Great was crowned Emperor of Rome in York. So he's a Brit. At the end of the day, Constantine was born to Constantius and Helena, who was a Briton. So at the end of the day, he's a Brit. Well, he would have known that Chester was the other option. So when he decides to put Constantinople in, as soon as you start looking at both of those centres, you think, oh, they've got a lot in common.
Mm.
And it's this commonality with the rest of the Roman world that, it obliterates London. London ceases to exist. It doesn't even come into the frame. It's not there for 1,000 years. It's about, I don't know, 1000, 1100 when that starts to take off after the Saxons. So, when you go back 2,000 years, it's all about the Roman Empire, and you've got to look at the structure that they created. But that'd blow me if they're not the same distance away from Rome. The parallels are just uncanny.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never learn anything about at school, do you?
No, nobody says that. Oh, there's so much they don't tell you at school. They really don't, you know.
Mm. So what sort of reactions do you get when you, because I know you talk to universities and places, don't you? Or in other places you do these talks. What sort of reaction do you get when you
Well, initially they're very cautious because I'm media orientated. So, as we were saying off camera at the beginning, I've done TV series, and a lot of the academics are very cautious when it comes to people doing television. You know, I mean, the fact that I've appeared on Ancient Aliens has probably, you know, scuppered any chance of me being taken seriously for goodness knows how long now. But I don't care.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I take it seriously.
Well, yeah. It's a new generation, isn't it? We're in the 21st century now, and so yeah, some of them are cautious when they first approach me. The various academic institutions, they're quite cautious. But then, as soon as they know what I'm about, and they see what I do, and I do the lectures, and you know, they look at the way the books are written, things like that. Normally, they then go to the other extreme, and they realise that actually I'm championing the cause. You know, I'm putting stuff out there that otherwise nobody would know about. You know, it would just disappear. I've had loads of people come up to me and gone, you know, I watched your TV series or I watched your TV program or whatever, and it got me started on this, and I went off and studied that, and excuse me, you know, so academically, you know, Chester still calls on me occasionally. I'm still lecturing at Wilmslow Guild, which is the oldest adult lecturing facility, I think, in the world. It's just coming up for 100 years. I think it's next year or the year after. So I'm still in academia. I still get called upon to do things in archaeology and what have you. And I don't intend to give that up, really. You know, somebody said the other day, when are you going to retire? And the answer is, I don't
That's
retire.
rather rude, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not going to. I think they assume I make a fortune doing television, but you don't.
No.
It's great for your profile, but it doesn't make a lot of money. You just get paid for a job and off you go. You know, that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that probably that book that you've written about King Arthur probably cost you money to actually do it with all your travelling around. And
I don't even want to know. I mean, how much time, you know? Yeah, I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
I mean, when Philip at Flying Disc Press said, "Yeah, go on, I'll take it. I'll take a chance," you know, because he does UFOs. He doesn't do history. But as it turned out, it's been a really good, popular book for him, which I'm glad. But when he said, you know, yeah, go on, I think I'll take it. It took me 55 hours to format it.
Wow,
so I sent it to him finished. But that's I'm never going to get that 55 hours back. You know, it's never going to pay for itself. But
and that's without the research in the first place.
Oh, 40 odd years, 40 plus years. But my way of looking at it is, you know, at the start of the last millennium, you had Geoffrey of Monmouth and his History of the Kings of Britain. You know, that was a Brutus book, as they call them, which is this idea that you're writing about the matter of Britain. You're writing about British history, you know, and the legends and the stories of Britain. That started the last millennium. So I'm thinking, well, this one will start this millennium. So if people are still, you know, arguing over this and reading it and thrashing over it, as long as they have Geoffrey, I'll be quite happy. You know, they'll still be rowing over it in 900 years' time. You know, so I'm quite happy about that. So it's definitely not about the money. Absolutely not. No. Unless somebody comes along and goes, I'll tell you what, we'll pay you a decent amount to do a couple of documentaries, and I'll be like, yeah, all right.
Well, you never know. It can happen, can't it?
Yeah, I might retire after that. It'd be great to do it, though. I mean, that'd just be awesome. That's where my heart's at, you know. Get a hold of a camera crew and go on location and actually show people where these things are and go, this is where it is, you know. Yeah. That'd just be brilliant.
If anyone happens to be listening and you'd like to take Mark Olly up on that, please get in touch with Mark or myself, and we'll set the ball rolling.
Shout me on Facebook. I'm on Messenger. You know,
because I mean, we do go out all over the States, and there's quite a lot of Americans that are interested in this kind of thing.
Yeah,
so, you never know who might be listening, Mark.
But it's not got anything to do with UFOs, but it's a good story, believe me.
No, well, maybe on another show we'll go into a bit more about UFOs and stuff like that. I mean, as I say, there's a massive amount of material that we can cover over some shows. I hope you'll come on again at some point.
Oh, absolutely. You're just about to have a guest appearance here by somebody that turns up quite regularly.
Oh, you got Pussycat. Yeah, Pussycat's just arrived on the screen.
He usually walks across the back. He's got this thing about interviews, you see. He likes to appear.
What's his name?
It's Stampy. Stampy, because he stamps with his feet. Look at this. He's been all over the world. He's been broadcast all over the world. He really has.
Yeah, for people listening on the audio, a cat's just appeared on the screen here.
Yeah, we've got a cat here. Yeah.
But Mark, it's been fantastic talking to you. Now, the name of your book again, please.
It's The Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph, and Arthur. And if
Right.
people want to get any of me books, because some of them have got quirky titles,
Hmm.
just type my name into Amazon. And even the ones I did back in the 1990s, you can still get on Amazon.
Yeah,
They're still there. So that's got to be the way forward. Just click it, pay for it.
absolutely.
A few
And
days later, it comes through your door.
that's Mark Olly. That's Olly. That's all you
It
need to
is.
put
It
in,
is.
and you should be able to find all sorts of amazing stuff from Mark. I mean, it's fascinating the amount of stuff you've done, honestly. But anyway, are you going to be appearing anywhere? I mean, I'm going to the Awakening in Manchester in
I
August.
am.
Is it? I think it's August.
I'm definitely going to blag my way in as a guest. I
Yeah.
mean, I can't. You can't miss an event like that, can you? Really, you just can't. So,
So
yeah,
hopefully I shall see you there.
you should see
And
me
I
at the
shall.
Awakening.
Hopefully, are you going to bring a couple of books with you? I'll probably pick a
Well,
couple up from you.
I mean, at the end of the day, most people can just they can just click and buy when I'm there. But I don't know. I don't know
You
whether
don't
I'm
want
actually.
I know what you mean. You don't want to lug a load of books about, do you? So
No, I just and I don't know. I might bring a few things with me that people would be interested in because it'd be wrong not to. So just tag on the end of somebody's stall somewhere with books for a day. I'm not sure I can come for all 3 days. We'll just have to see.
no, I'm there for
Um,
all 3 days, but hopefully I'll pick up, meet you for one of that. I'll buy you a drink if I can get to meet you
yeah, all
again.
right, yeah. Well, it's funny because at one event I was looking at you thinking, I know who you are, and
I
you're looking at me
know.
thinking, I know who that is, and we passed in a doorway and we kind of just nodded, and that was it. And so, yeah,
Well, you know what these that was with the Whitley Strieber event, because
it
I
was.
saw you and I
Yes,
thought
yeah,
I know you from somewhere. And then,
yeah.
you know what it's like? You don't get a lot of time in between sort of like the little events, do you? When you
Well,
sort of sitting, you're getting
yeah.
back to your seat, ready for the next bit. And you think,
I'll have to go back to the Lost Treasures look as well, because by the end of the year, this beard, I'm going to be tripping over it. I mean, for those of you that are just listening in, I have an enormous beard. I look like ZZ Top at the moment because the
it's a bit
Americans
like
like
a
it.
Father Christmas beard you've got, isn't it?
That's the one, yeah. Keep it till December and just rent a red suit out. But no, it'll probably be gone by the end of the year. But there you go.
Well, hopefully I'll
Yeah.
recognise you. I should do, but
Oh yeah,
hopefully you'll recognise me. So just grab me by the collar or something, and
I'll say hi for sure. Yeah.
definitely. No, Mark. But we might even do another show before that.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I mean, I've got this book coming out in August, this Europe's Roswell, because there was a UFO crash outside Aberystwyth in 1983. So Philip just said to me one day, he said, look, I do UFOs. Isn't it time you did a UFO book? And by the way, it's 40 years since this crash, because I did a documentary DVD in 2008 on it, which you'll probably find online somewhere. I'm sure it's out, or Amazon Prime, I think you might get it on. But it's out there. So he said, well, why don't you just do it as a book? Because you can't get the DVD anymore. So I'm like, yeah, that's not a bad idea. So August, we're hoping to get it out in August.
August, okay,
Yeah.
Right. Book you for August. Is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah,
And we'll do another show on it.
Yeah, drop me a line on Messenger anytime. Absolutely anytime you need.
Fantastic. Well, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for finding the time to come on.
That's all right. It's a pleasure.
It's been a great pleasure having you on, and I will see you. And we definitely will do another show. Well,
lovely. Thanks for having me.
I reckon about 40 shows we've got here from all this stuff.
Be happy to do it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. It's been so good talking to you, and take care of yourself. And
all right.
If you take your beard off or not, I'll see you at Manchester.
You'll see me soon. All right, then.
Take care of yourself, Mark. Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. There you go, Mark. Thank you very much. It was excellent.
It was genuinely a pleasure. And your questions were great. Honestly, we covered some real territory there. You got a few in there that nobody else had asked as well, which is always good.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Lady of the Lake's never come up before. So that whole section's, that's new.
Well, they're all kind of things. I think when you talk about King Arthur, you've got to cover the main sort of subjects, I think.
Yes.
Where they came from and everything.
Yeah.
And because I think when we're talking about people in America listening to this, they're the things they all know about Arthur. And, it's kind of good to hear where those stories actually came from.
Well, one of the biggest things out there apparently is Merlin. Everybody just goes absolutely bonkers for Merlin. So growing this beard was a fabulous accidental PR thing. It's they absolutely love it. So there's one lady out there doing interviews for. She calls me Merlin. So well, whatever.
Well, you look the part. I guess if they're making a film about Merlin, you'd be straight up there saying, that's that.
I've done my bit of acting in my time. Yeah, I don't mind. Yeah.
Excellent. Anyway, well, I'll let you go there. Thank you very
It's a
much.
pleasure. Thanks for having me. And give us a shout when you need us again.
Before you go, how are you going to chop that off? Is it scissors and then shave it, or?
I'm actually thinking, because it's been so long that I've, since I think it was beginning of last year or something when I started, I might treat myself to a proper barber's. You know, there's all these like Victorian style barbers now that pop up in villages. We've got two. So I could sit in a barber's chair and I could just say to this guy, you know, knock yourself out kind of thing, and off you go. So I'm thinking of doing that and making a big deal of it because I deserve it.
All right. I'll give you a little story about I started mine off in lockdown when I said about having a face covering. Well, I thought, well, I'll grow mine.
Well, I used to have masses of hair. I had loads of hair, and then at the end of last year, for some reason, all the like salt and pepper, you know, the slightly black one, it all fell out and just left me with grey. So I thought, I can't do that. I need hair, you know. So this has took place, but it's great. It's started growing back now. You know, I've got a bit more now, so I might be happy to just let this go back to the goatee, because I used to have mine very much like yours.
A bit like that, yeah. A couple of times they used to say, "Where's your face covering?" or "Where's your mark?" I say, "Well, I'm wearing it. There it is."
Yeah, totally.
I never would wear one. I just say, "This is it."
No, you're on the same page as me. Totally the same page as me. Yeah.
Anyway, Mark, well, I'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, yeah. Thanks for having me.
And I look forward to seeing you. I'll book a date with you for August, and we'll come.
Drop me a line on Messenger or drop me an email or however you want to do, and we'll fix it up.
Great, sure. Thanks, Mark. Stay in touch. Great talking to you. And
lovely. Yeah. Keep sending me posts and things, and send me the link. Send me the link for this.
I won't miss you again. I know that.
Yeah.
You take care of yourself. Cheers, Mark.
Take care. See you soon.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.